In general, this passage is about anarchism. It looks at anarchism in a rather positive way instead of in a negative way, as has been the practice for years together or for centuries together. They treat anarchism as something negative. But here it is treated as positive. And the third thing is he will talk about different kinds of anarchism, the origin of anarchism, right? Now let's come to the paragraphs here. In the first paragraph, he talks about anarchism being treated as negative, and then it becomes, you see, it's used in a positive sense, you see, since 1840, you see, because there was a person known by the name of Pierre Joseph Proudhon, and he had his social and political ideology, and he treated anarchism as something positive. And he argued, in fact, we don't require a government in any organization, and it would function very well without a government. And another point he made was that his idea of liberalism and socialism, you see, is closely related to anarchism. That is the first point in the paragraph number one. In paragraph number two, he talks about the history of anarchism, the origin of anarchism, that it rose, you see, from the gap between the rich and the poor in any community. That gave, you see, the impetus to anarchism, because the poor had to fight for their rights, for their share of things, but nobody paid attention to that. And it has been a perennial problem, the fight between the rich and the poor. And that gave, you see, rise to anarchism. The point is, he takes up the example of France, and he says what happened, you see, after the French Revolution. You see, there was a revolution in France, the government changed, and the poor thought that there is a change for the better, the revolution for the better. But nothing of that kind happened. There were negative outcomes, there were negative results. And what was the negative result? The negative result was that Napoleon Bonaparte became the ruler, and the rich, you see, ruling caste, they became prominent, and the government was supporting the rich. So the poor remained where they were. There was no improvement in their situation. In the third paragraph, he again talks about the state. You see, the state, you see, which exploits, which tyrannizes the people. And the anarchists are against this kind of terrorization, this kind of centralized state power. What happens is there is a revolution, but after the revolution, the same thing happens. And what is that same thing? That is, the state comes to power. And then they, you see, establish their power, their hold over the people. And then there's a widening gap between the rich and the poor. And in the next paragraph, he expands the same idea. He says the state, you see, is the enemy of the anarchist. You see, the state is the enemy of the anarchist. And what happens is that the state, you see, supports the people who are powerful, who are rich, who are in the opposition. The state never bothers about them. In the next paragraph, he talks about two kinds of what you call anarchism. One is anarchist communism, and the other is collective anarchism. The anarchist communism has to do with everything in society, the production, property, natural resources, everything, the means of production, everything is in control of the society. It's a joint affair, right? That is anarchist communism. And it is opposed to what you call any kind of central authority, you see. And the other is collective anarchism, is, of course, the freedom of the individual or the family. They can possess land, they can possess the means of production and so forth. But at the same time, they won't interfere with the social position of production and other things. The individual, you see, is given importance there in the collective anarchism, but at the same time, the social control of things, you see, is not overlooked. It is there. So that is what he says in this paragraph. And then in the last paragraph, he talks about individual anarchism. And this individual anarchism, you see, he tries to differentiate from the American variety and the German variety. And the focus is on the individual and the free market liberals, you see. So this is the passage that I have summarized for you. And now let's look at the questions here. The first question, which one of the following best expresses the similarity between American individualist anarchists and free market liberals, as well as the difference between the former and the latter? Now, if you look at the last paragraph where he talks about the individualist anarchism, you will get the answer to this question. Number one, he says both reject the regulatory power of the state, but the former favor people state while the latter favor state intervention in markets. It's not that. And the next is both prioritize individual autonomy, yes, but the former also emphasizes mutual independence while the latter do not do so, right? So the former refers to the American individualist anarchist and the latter refers to the free market liberals. So number two is the correct option. Let's come to the next question. The author makes all of the following arguments in the passage except. Let's see. The individualist anarchism is actually constituted of many streams, all of which focus on the autonomy of the individual. Yes, he makes that argument. The popular perception of anarchism as espousing lawlessness and violence comes from a mainstream mistrust of collectivism. Does he make this statement? Does he say that the conception of anarchism, you see, is basically lawlessness and violence, and it comes from its origin is in collectivism? He doesn't say that. So the option is number two. And the third, for anarchists, the state is the enemy because all states apply violence and terror to maintain their control. No, that is not an exception. That is mentioned in the passage, you see. So that cannot be the answer. The failure of the French Revolution was because of its betrayal of the new class of politicians who emerged from it. That is true. That is the argument, you see. It's not an exception. Now let's come to the next question. According to the passage, what is the one idea that is common to all forms of anarchism? Let's see that. There is no idea common to all forms of anarchism. That is why it is anarchic. No, that is not the answer. They all focus on the primacy of the power of the individual. They don't, because he has talked about anarchist communism, he has talked about individual anarchism, he has talked about collective anarchism. It's not that everything focuses on the individual. They all derive from the work of Pierre Joseph Proudhon. No, they don't derive. In fact, Proudhon just talks about anarchism in a positive way. They are all opposed to the centralization of the power in state. That is the correct option. You see, that is common to all forms of anarchism, whether it is anarchist communism, whether it is individual anarchism, or whether it is collective anarchism. They are all opposed to the centralization of power in the state because they say the state is the enemy there. So number four is the correct option. The next one, the author believes that the new ruling class of politicians betrayed the principles of French Revolution. That is what he says there. Okay, but does not specify in what way. In the context of the passage, which statement below is the likeliest explanation of that betrayal? Yes, what is the likeliest? They were betrayed because he says that in the second paragraph, right? In the French Revolution, what happened? The people were betrayed because the new ruling class, the new class of politicians came to power and they started harassing people. The new ruling class rose to power on the strength of the workers' revolutionary anger, but then turned to oppress that very class. That is the correct option. That is an expansion of what has been stated, you see. So number one is the correct option. The others aren't. Next question, of the following sets of concepts, identify the set that is conceptually closest to the concerns of the passage. Yes, let us see. Anarchism, betrayal, power, state. But then he doesn't here talk about individual. The individual is equally important. So individual has been left out. So number one cannot be the answer. Revolution, state, strike, egoism. Anarchism has been left out because that is a very important thing. It's all about anarchism. So number two cannot be the answer. Revolution, state, protection, liberals. Again, anarchism has been left out. And the individual has been left out. So that cannot be the answer. The correct option is number four, anarchism, state, individual, freedom. Let's come to the next passage here. In general, I'll tell you what the passage is about. It is about the elephant seals. You see, location, relocation, and the language of the elephant seal. Some scientists studied, you see, the language of the elephant seals, particularly of the males, and he came to a conclusion that there is a kind of dialect you see involved there, because the concept of dialect you see is peculiar only to human beings. Only human beings have dialects. You see, non-human beings cannot have dialects. You see, birds and animals, they don't have dialects. But then this scientist, you see, Bernie Lee Biff, he came with a point that the elephant seal, a non-human mammal, you see, it does have a dialect. Now, that is the main thing in the passage. Dialects, then you see, differ from place to place, and this happens with the elephant seals also. In the first paragraph, he talks about the elephant seals being non-human mammals having a dialect. And the study was made by what you call Bernie Lee Biff. He studied the population you see along the coasts of Mexico and California, and they came to the conclusion that there is a dialectal variety in the calls made by the elephant seals. In the second paragraph, he talks about, you can look at this one colony that he talks about, the island, Guadalupe Island, the Isla Guadalupe. What he wants to point out here is, in this paragraph, that originally this Guadalupe was the founder colony, you see, where the elephant seals were. From this place, sometimes they were transported or they relocated to some other places. And what is the point of relocation here? The point of relocation here is they found that the noise, the calls made by the elephant seals in the original founder colony and in the relocated colony, you see, there was a difference in that. And that is how they came to the conclusion that there is a dialectical variety in their calls. In the third paragraph, he expands further and they go and visit, you see, the Ano Nuevo Island in California. And there they found that they give a particular period from 1968 to 1972 that the pulse rate of the males was very slow, but then it was slowly increasing. And but it was slow. He's talking about the variation in the pulse rate, and it's only because of that variation in the calls that they came to the conclusion that there is a kind of dialectical variety you see amongst the seals, right? And particularly the males. Research shows them that in the 1960s and you see later in the 2010, you see there was a greater complexity involved in that pulse rate and the calls. Now we can come to the questions here. And he says here, which one of the following conditions, if true, could have ensured that the male northern elephant seal dialects did not disappear? Besides Isla Guadalupe, there was one more surviving colony with the same average male called Tempo, from which no migration took place. No, that's not the answer. The call tempo of individual male seals in host colonies changed to match the average call tempo of immigrant male seals. Nothing, I don't think that is mentioned there. Besides Isla Guadalupe, there was one more founder colony with the same average male call tempo from which male seals migrated to various other colonies. No. The call tempo of individual immigrant male seals changed to match the average tempo of resident male seals in the host colony. That is the correct option. Number 4. The next question. All of the following can be inferred from Lee Biff's study as described in the passage, except that changes in population and migration had no effect on the call pulse rate of individual male northern elephant seals. That is not the answer. The influx of new northern elephant seals into Ano Nuevo Island would have soon made the call pulse rate of its male seals exceed that those of Isla Guda. This cannot be inferred. Okay, so number 2 is the correct option. Male northern elephant seals, no, that is not the answer. So the correct option is number 2. The next one. Which one of the following best sums up the overall history of transformation of male northern elephant seal calls? Owing to the migrations in the aftermath of near species extinction, the calls have transferred from exhibiting complex composition, less individual variety and greater regional variety, to simple composition, less individual variety and greater regional variety. I don't think that is the correct option. It's not that, because it's not great regional variety. I think it is less regional variety. So number 1 cannot be the correct option. There is also greater individual variety there. The calls have transformed from exhibiting simple composition, great individual variety. Again, the same mistake you see. It's not great individual variety, it's actually less individual variety. So number 2 is again incorrect. Number 3, you have owing to migrations in the aftermath of near species extinction, the average calls pulse rate in the recolonized breeding locations exhibited a gradual increase until they matched the tempo at the founding colony. That doesn't sum up the calls you see. Number 4, the calls have transformed from exhibiting simple composition, less individual variety, great regional variety, to complex composition, great individual variety, and less regional variety. So that is the correct option. Number 4 is the correct option. The next one, from the passage, it can be inferred that the call pulse rate of male northern elephant seals in southern rookeries was faster because. Why? The correct option is number 2. The male northern elephant seals of Ayla Gudalpe with faster calls per rate might have been the original sletters of the southern rooks. That is the correct option, and that is stated there in the passage. The next passage is about the types of currency used in China somewhere during the Tang dynasty, some 1600 years ago. And he's talking about the types of currencies you see that were used there, and which currency was appropriate and adaptable, and which currency was less costlier, and which currency you see was more popular. That's what he's talking about in the entire passage. In the first paragraph, he talks about they had a complex financial system and they had kinds of currency. Number 1, grain. Number 2, coins. Number 3, textiles. There were 3 of them, and they were used as currency, as money, you see. The advantage with coins was that the coins were durable and they could be used for a longer period of time. They were also convenient, you see, for smaller transactions. But the problem with coins was that the government had a problem, you see, minting those coins for the entire empire. Moreover, carrying the coins was also sometimes a problem, transporting them. The next currency was textiles, and textiles had advantages as well as disadvantages. Textiles, you see, they were used as the medium of currency. They were used in bundles, in sheaves. But then when you have to pay for small items, you have to cut, you see, from the textile. From large bundles, one had to cut, and that would be a problematic. A new textile sheaf or a bundle, you see, a bolt of textile being cut into small pieces, you see, that would lessen the value of the textile. And moreover, textiles, you go for wear and tear also. So there were advantages as well as disadvantages. Grains also, you see, there was a problem in the last but one paragraph. He says that the government used for textiles for large transactions, and coins, you see, were suited for smaller transactions. But grain, you see, had to be used carefully because the grain would rot very quickly. It would decay. So they had to be very careful about the usage of grain. And then he talks about the currency of today and the currency of, you see, that was used in China during that day, and he tries to draw a similarity between the two. So let's come to the questions now. In the context of the passage, which one of the following can be inferred with regard to the use of currency during the Tang era? Currency usage was similar to that of modern times. Currency that deteriorated easily was not used for official work. No, that is not an inference. Copper coins were more valuable and durable than textiles. Grains were the most used currency because of gum. No. The correct option is number 1. Currency usage was similar to that of modern time. That is, you find in the last paragraph. According to the passage, the modern currency system shares all of the following features with that of the Tang, except that it uses different materials as currency. Its currencies fluctuate in value over time. No. It uses different currencies for different situations. No. It is undergoing transformation. So that is the correct option. Number 4 is the correct option. It is undergoing transformation. This one isn't shared with that of Chinese currency because the Chinese currency doesn't undergo transformation. So that is an exception here. When discussing textiles, As currency in the Tang period, the author uses the word steady and stable to indicate all of the following except what? Reliable supply, reliable measurement, reliable quality. Except what he called reliable transportation, because transportation was the problem, you see, of whether textiles or grains or coins. It was a problem. It was costly, as well as it would land up in wear and tear of the textiles and decay of grains. During the Tang period, which one of the following could not be an economically sound decision for a small purchase in the local market, that is 1/8 of a bolt of cloth? Cutting 1/8 of the fabric from a new bolt to pay the amount. I told you, I mean, that would not be very economically sound decision, because cutting small pieces from the bolt would possibly leave the bolt, you see, of no use later on. So number one is the correct option. Making the payment with appropriate weight of grain, that could be maybe sound. Using coins, even that could be okay. Paying with a faded bolt of cloth, even faded bolt would do, but who would possibly accept the faded bolt? So number one is the correct option. Now let's come to the next passage, which involves a certain kind of sarcastic humor in the entire passage, because it's all about the use of grammar and constructing sentences and so forth. How, what are simple sentences, paying attention to grammar, paying attention to words. It's about that. So in the first paragraph, he tells that grammar is very important. He says we have 7 parts of speech, and he says if you count interjections like ho and ha, that make all 8 parts of speech. So he says sentences are bound by the rules of grammar. If your grammar is bad, then you produce bad sentences. People sometimes construct wrong sentences also. In the next paragraph, he talks about the nouns and the verbs. And he says they are the most important part of any writing or any sentence. Without, you see, a verb or a noun, you cannot possibly construct a sentence. Any sentence would contain a subject and a verb, and the subject is generally a noun, and subject and a predicate, and the predicate is usually a verb. Now in the third paragraph, he says, must you write complete sentences each time, every time? He says it's not necessary, you see, that you write complete sentences all the time. Even a single word can be a sentence. For if you say go, come, they are all sentences. They are all sentences because they mean something. So he says that you cannot possibly overlook the point that even single words, you see, can be sentences, because it is grammatically correct to have sentences of that kind which contain a single word. And then he jokes about the use of the word unless in the next paragraph, and he says it's very necessary to have a good grasp over grammar if you want to be correct. And in the last paragraph, he talks about the simple sentence. He says if you take any noun and put a verb with it, you will have a sentence, a simple sentence, you see. He says it never fails. Like you have rocks explode, Jane transmit, mountains float. They are all, he says, perfect sentences. You have such sentences which are made up only two items, two grammatical parts of speech. One is a noun and the other is verb. He says the simplicity of noun verb construction is useful, and it provides safety for your writing. You are safe when you write this way, and you don't have to enter the world of restrictive and non-restrictive clauses and modifying phrases and so forth. We can come to the questions now. Which one of the following quotes best captures the main concern of the passage? Nouns and verbs are two indispensable parts of writing. That's not the main idea of the passage. That is only what goes into the passage. Strunk and White caution against too many simple sentences in a row. That is not the main idea. The telling clause here is unless. That is an example. That is not the main idea. The main idea that is captured, you see, is in bad grammar produces bad sentence. So that is the correct option. Which one of the following statements, if false, could be seen as supporting the arguments in the passage? An understanding of grammar helps a writer decide if she is writing well or not. It's not false, you see. It's correct. Perish the thought that complete sentences necessarily need nouns and verbs. It has been observed that writers sometimes disregard the rules of rhetoric. That's correct. Regarding grammar, women writers tend to be more attentive to method and accuracy. No, the correct option is number 2. This supports, you see, the arguments in the passage. Perish the thought that complete sentences needs nouns and verbs. You can get rid of that thought that complete sentences require both noun and words. You can only construct sentences with only verbs, you see, by saying come, go, right? Or even saying sit down without a noun. You can have sentences of that kind. So number 2 is the correct option. The next question is, all of the following statements can be inferred from the passage except you can infer from the passage the subject predicate relation is the same as noun verb relation. Yes, you can infer that. The primary purpose of grammar is to ensure that sentences remain simple. No, you cannot infer this thing. I mean, it is your choice. You can construct, you see, sentences, simple sentences, but it doesn't mean that the primary purpose of grammar is to ensure that sentences remain simple. No. So you can't infer that. Number 2 is the correct option. Sentences do not always have to be complete. No, grammar police is a metaphor for critics who focus on linguistics. That's all right. Let's come to the next one. Take any noun, put it with any verb, and you have a sentence. It never fails. Rocks explode, Jane transmit, mountains float. None of the following statement can be seen as similar, except a collection of people with the same sports equipment is a sports team. No. Take an apple tree, plant it in a field, and you have an orchard. No. A group of nouns arranged in a row becomes a sentence. No. Take any vegetable, put some spices in it, and you have a dish. That is why you have number 4 as the option. Why can't you have number 2? Because number 2 sounds more or less the same. The point is, the question of what you call constructing something and growing something. You say take an apple, plant it in a field. Now if you go by the sense that is given in the question, you just put a verb with a noun and you have a sentence. You see that matches with you take any vegetable, put some spices in it, and then you have a dish. So that is why we are going for number 4. We are not going for number 2. Inferring from the passage, the author could be most supportive of which one of the following practice? A creative writing course that focuses on how to avoid the use of rhetoric? No. The critique of standardized rules of punctuation and capitalization, it doesn't talk about that. A campaign demanding that a writer's creative license should allow the breaking of grammatical rules, I don't think there in the passage. The availability of language software that will standardize the rules of grammar as an aid to the writer. That is the correct option, you see, number 4. Let's come to the next one. Tensions and sometimes conflict remain an issue in and between the 11 states in Southeast Asia, Brunei, and so forth. China's rise as a regional military power and its claim in the South China Sea have become an increasingly pressing security concern for many Southeast Asian states. Since the 1990s, the security environment of Southeast Asia has been both continuously a continuity and profound changes. These concerns, you can't start with these concerns. See, in the available sentences, I think number 3 is the first sentence. Why number 3? It talks about a date, you see, since the 1990s. We start there. Since the 1990s, the security environment of Southeast Asia has been both continuity and profound changes. And then he goes on to illustrate that in number 1, tensions and sometimes conflict remain an issue in and between the 11 states in Southeast Asia. So 3 is followed by 1. And then he gives you an example of China, that is in 2. China's rise as a regional military power, that is 2. And the last one is these concerns, that what he has been talking about. Increasingly pressing security concern for many Southeast Asian states, that mentioned in what you call number 2, concern, and number 4 talks about those concerns. So 3, 1, 2, 4. Let's come to the next one. So I'll quickly read through the passage. For nearly a century, most psychologists have embraced one view of intelligence. Individuals are born with more or less intelligence potential, that is IQ. Okay, that is the intelligent quotient. This potential is heavily influenced by hereditary and difficult to alter. Experts in measurement can determine a person's intelligence early in life, currently from paper and pencil measures, perhaps eventually from examining the brain in action or even scrutinizing her genome. Recently, criticism of this conventional wisdom has mounted. Biologists ask if speaking of a single entity called intelligence is coherent and question the validity of measures used to estimate heritability of a trait in humans who, unlike plants or animals, are not conceived and bred under controlled conditions. Okay, there are two major points. One, he talks about the intelligent quotient, and the second, he talks about how to measure that quotient. And the third thing is whether that kind of measurement is valid, you see, whether it is proper to use inheritability or genome, or whether it is valid, because human beings are not in controlled conditions like plants and animals, you see. Biologists have questioned the long-standing view that intelligence is a single entity and the attempts to estimate its heritability. Okay, number one, biologists have questioned the view that intelligence is a single entity and the ways in which what is inherited. No, that number two, the first part is okay, but the second part doesn't give the entire thing, you see. Biologists have criticized that conventional wisdom that individuals are born with more or less intelligence potential. No, but this is beside the point, you see. Biologists have started questioning psychologists' view of intelligence as a measurable, immutable characteristics of an individual. That's only one part of the story. The best summary is in number one. Biologists have questioned the long-standing view that intelligence is a single entity, okay, and the attempts to estimate its heritability. They have questioned that. Now look at the next exercise. So if you look at number one, relying on narrative structure alone, that's a general kind of statement. Number two says using their supernatural potency. So we don't know what there refers to. So two cannot be the first set. Okay. Number three, selected tales reveal that they deal. Who deals? We don't know who they are. So again, three cannot be the first sentence. A meaning can be elicited and the tales contextualized by probing beneath the narrative of what tales he is talking about, we don't know. So 2, 3, 4 cannot be the first sentence. The first sentence then has to be number one. Relying on narrative structure alone, indigenous significances of the 19th century Sa folk tales are hard to determine. There we have the folk tales, you see. They are hard to determine. And what is hard to determine? The significance of the 19th century folk tales. The significance here means the indigenous significance refers to what you call the meaning and the interpretation that is involved there. So when it comes to significances, then one should be followed by four, where he says meaning can be elicited and the tales contextualized by probing beneath the narrative of verbatim original language records and exploring the connotations of highly significant words and phrases. So one is followed by four, and then you have number three. Selected tales reveal that they deal with a form of spiritual conflict. So he's talking about the tales first, the narrative structure, then he talks about the meaning, and then he talks about certain tales. And then after that, you have two, that is using their supernatural pull. So 1, 4, 3, 2. Now let's come to the next question here. For years, movies and television series like Crime Scene Investigation paint an unrealistic picture of the science of voices. In the 1994 movie Clear and Present Danger, an expert listens to a brief recorded utterance and declares that the speaker is Cuban, aged 35 to 45, educated in the eastern United States. The recording is then fed to a supercomputer that matches the voice to that of a suspect, concluding that the probability of correct identification is 90%. This sequence sums up a good number of misimpressions about forensic phonetics, which have led to errors in real-life justice. Indeed, that movie scene exemplifies the so-called CSI effect, that is the crime scene investigation effect, the phenomenon in which judges hold unrealistic expectations of the capabilities of forensic science. So basically, he's questioning, you see, the capability of forensic science, right? So let's now look and see which one of of these is the best summary. So number one, voice recognition has started to feature prominently in crime scene intelligence because of movies and television series. That is only one part of the story. It doesn't go to the whole thing. You see, voice recognition as used in many movies to identify criminals has been used to identify criminals in real life also. Well, that is a point that has been made. Although voice recognition is often presented as evidence in legal cases, its scientific basis can be shaky. The last one, movies and televisions have led to the belief that the use of forensic phonetics is legal investigations is robust and foolproof. So number four is the best summary because it is based on what the movies and televisions have said, and to the belief you see that phonetics you see is robust and foolproof. That is only a statement that has been that is best sums up the entire passage. Now let's come to the next one, and here he says, as Soviet power declined, the world became to some extent multipolar, and Europe strove to define an independent identity. What a journey Europe has undertaken to reach this point. It had in every century changed its internal structure and invented new ways of thinking about the nature of international order. Now, at the culmination of an era, Europe, in order to participate in it, felt obliged to set aside the political mechanisms through which it had conducted its affairs for 3.5 centuries. Impelled also by the desire to cushion the emergent unification of Germany, the new European Union established a common currency in 2002 and a formal political structure in 2004. It proclaimed a Europe united, whole and free, adjusting its differences by peaceful mechanics. Okay, what has Europe done? Let's see. Europe has constantly changed in keeping with the changing world order, and that has culminated in a united Europe. I don't think that is a very good sum. In fact, it has not changed. It is trying to adapt itself. The establishment of a formal political structure in Europe was hastened by the unification of Germany and the emergence of a multipolar world. He doesn't talk about Russia. It's not necessary to talk about Soviet power, but then at the same time, it's not necessary to talk about what you call the emergence or unification of Germany here. Europe has consistently changed its internal structure to successfully adapt to the changing world order. No, the best summary is number four. Europe has chosen to lower political and economic heterogeneity in order to adapt itself to an emerging multipolar world. This brings in all the points you see in the passage. Now let's come to the next question. Let's see. Man has used poisons for assassination purposes ever since the dawn of civilization against individual enemies, but also occasionally against armies. That's a general statement. These dangers were soon recognized. So this sentence cannot start with these dangers because we don't know what these refers to. So number two cannot be the first sentence. And number three, the foundation of microbiology by Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch offered new prospects for those interested in biological weapons because it allowed agents to be chosen and designed on a rational basis. That is one point. Though treaties were all made in good faith, they contained no means of control and so fail to prevent interested parties. So we don't know what treaties are made. So in the available what you call context, number one is the best option. Number one should be the first sentence. Man has used poisons for assassination purposes ever since the dawn of civilization against individual enemies, but also occasionally against armies. And this use of poisons against enemies and armies, they are the dangers. So therefore if you're talking about dangers, that is number two. But then what we have here is the first sentence is number one, the second should be number three, the foundation of microbiology by Louis Pasteur, because he's talking about those weapons there, poison there, and we have the biological weapons in number three. And after three, you have the dangers of those weapons and those poisons. You see these dangers, number two, and then we have of course four after that, 1, 3, 2, 4. 5 jumbled up sentences, and 4 of them can be put together to form a coherent paragraph. You have to identify the odd one out. For feminists, the question of how we read is inextricably linked with the question of what we read. Elaine Showalter's critique of literary curriculum is exemplary of this work. That is, Elaine Showalter is a feminist critic, right? Well known for her writings on feminism. Androcentric literature structures the reading experience differently depending on the gender of the reader. Androcentric has to do with concentration on men, on the male. The documentation of this realization was one of the earliest tasks undertaken by feminist critics. More specifically, the feminist inquiry into the activity of reading begins with the realization that the literary canon is androcentric, and this has a profoundly damaging effect on women readers. All 4 sentences have to do with feminism. 1, 2, 4, and 5. Only number 3 is the odd one out, which talks about concentration on male literature. Otherwise, all the sentences have to do with literature written by feminist criticism and feminist literature, right? So number 3 is the odd one out. The next, take up these 5 jumbled up sentences. We are taking this up. Talk was the most common way for enslaved men and women to subvert the rules of their bondage to gain more agency than they were supposed to have. Even in conditions of extreme violence and unfreedom, their words remain ubiquitous, ephemeral, irrepressible, and potentially aggressive. Slaves came from societies in which oaths, orations, and invocations carried great potency, both between people and as a connection to the all-powerful spirit world. Freedom of speech and the power to silence may have been preeminent markers of white liberty in colonies, but at the same time, slavery depended on dialogue. Slaves could never be completely muted. Slave owners obsessed over slave talk, yet feared its power to bind and inspire. For as everyone knew, oaths, whispers, and secret conversations bred conspiracy and revolt. Now, if you look carefully at these sentences, it's talking about slaves in general, their freedom of speech, and their obsession over slave talk, and so forth. So, 1, 2, 4, 5, they are more or less what you call can be connected together, but the 3 is the odd one out.